lady actually wrote this. We just did some editorial work on it. But it's sort of a précis of his discussion today. Gives me great pleasure to introduce Commander David Howard. He was graduated off 153 pilots course and flew Hercs for 7 years. Then he got posted down to Sale and flew King Airs for about 4 years. Went up to Darwin as the liaison officer and then the editor of the base up there. He's had a variety of postings in staff positions. Most interestingly is he was the air liaison officer up in Darwin and again in Brisbane, and he's had a posting to Papua New Guinea. He's here today to talk about 5th generation air bases, which is good because we've got a subject matter expert from headquarters CSG to talk about it. So thank you all for coming, and over to you.
Thanks, sir. Thank you, Air Commodore Green, Air Commodore Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And I'd like to thank the Air Power Development Centre for inviting me to come and talk today, and thank you all for turning up. It's important for us in CSG to try and spread the message, because I think, as you'll see, maybe we still have a bit of marketing problem and we need to get out there and spread our message a little bit more. I'm planning to talk for about 40 minutes, which means I'll talk for about an hour. That's just how I work. And then hopefully at the end we've got time for some questions. There's a lot of topics to discuss in regard to air bases when you're talking about moving it forward to the 5th generation. You could talk about force structures, you could talk about command and control, a whole bunch of things, but we don't have time to cover that today. So I'm going to try and stay fairly tight to the topic, which is some of the systems and technological aspects of what we're trying to do under our Jericho Program 8. So if there is anything you want to bring up that's slightly off topic, we'll probably take those questions at the end and we can explore them a little bit, but they might need to be addressed further later on. All right, so we're going to give a bit of background as how we got to this point, and we're not very far advanced yet, but we have been to a few key events that have got us to where we are now. I want to talk about air bases as a weapons system because I think it's a pretty important concept. We'll talk about 5th generation airbase design or aspects of it, and a bit of a discussion about the future airbase workforce. So we got here because Plan Jericho brought out a program of work which included a Plan Jericho program, Project 8, which was to improve the Air Force's airbase warfighting capability. We didn't really have much of an idea of how we're going to fit that into the 5th generation space. We came up with something for the Air Power Conference in 2016. We just took the 5th generation characteristics of our combat platforms and we said, how would you apply that to an airbase? And that sort of evolved. And so by the time the Avalon Air Show came along in 2017, we took a concept or an emulator down to Avalon Air Show to show it off, to indicate how we thought we could network a whole bunch of the airbase systems and give us a better way of doing business on the base. Since at the air show, a whole bunch of the senior leadership came in, and I think we overachieved. They were impressed. They wanted an operational product delivered to Tyndall by October last year. That wasn't going to happen, but we've progressed. We've raised a minor item submission for Air Force Minor 1070. The intent is to go through and prototype the capability. It's a world first, what we're trying to do. I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute, but there's nothing out there we can buy, and it's not even certain that we'll be able to achieve what we're proposing. So we felt it's important to go through and do the development work and prototype it in accordance with the Jericho acquisition process, so that if we do go into a major project to buy it, we've de-risked it and we've got a really good idea of what it is we actually need to do the job. So the mine is not approved yet, but we've been progressing, and because it's the end of financial year fire sale, we've managed to find some funds, and we've still done a fair bit of good work to this point. So Plan Jericho Project 8 was to improve Air Force's airbase warfighting capability. And I just want to focus on one word when you talk about capability, and really what we're talking about is achieving the desired operational effect. Now, for those people in the room who've got background in airbases, I'm sorry to put you through these next few slides, but what is apparent is that across all of Air Force and Defence, a lot of people don't really have an insight as to what happens on airbases. It's just somewhere you go and stuff happens. So I just want to give you a bit of a background about the airbases. So in terms of operational effects or missions, there's different types of airbases. So if you look there, you've got a main operating base, which is Amberley and Richmond, and then we go to places where we project our air power and we've got forward operating bases. But we might be inserting a joint force, so instead we have an airport of debarkation. And we can be achieving more than one of these effects on a single base. But the important thing here is that depending on the operational effect we're achieving with the base, the force construct and the services we deliver will be quite different. So an APOD will be very air terminal heavy and security heavy and airfield engineering heavy. The forward operating base may be very health heavy if we're in a conflict zone with a surgical capability, and very logistics heavy. So it does vary quite broadly. We do provide about 200 different products and services on an airbase, all essential to the enabling of air power. Now, some of them aren't very exciting. Postal, right? You want to post stuff home? Post your toys home? We have postal. At the other end, we have surgical health capabilities. We have security and ground defence, and then we have things like PDIs. So a whole gamut of different products and services on the base, but at some point, all of them become essential. To manage them, we group them into 10 rough groups. It's not really important because they're not unique or exclusive to those groups. So, for example, if we have an airfield accident on an airbase, we're going to be using some health capability, we're going to be using some airfield engineering capability, we'll be using some security capability. From all these areas, resources from all these areas to actually respond to the problem. But we just manage them within those groups. But what we end up with is an airbase that is a system of systems. And all the systems are interdependent. Right, so 200 products and services we've got to coordinate across the airbase. We don't own them all. In a very rare case, if we're in a full-on war zone and everybody else that would provide us with commercial support or host nation support has run away, we have to have the capacity to provide all of those services by ourselves. But if we're on a permanent airbase, Amberley or Richmond, a lot of the services are provided by our service provider groups. If we go to a host nation civil or military airfield, we'll operate within an area with a lot of services provided by the host nation. That reduces the footprint required and reduces the standing force in some instances we need to maintain, but it also creates a lot of problems in coordinating those services that you might not own or control. But you still have, the airbase commander still has to provide a level of assurance to the air commander that these services will be available for the generation of air power. So it's a complex problem. So what we need to discuss, so my commander was down at Canberra at a meeting and he was talking with a colleague from another service and he proposed in passing that the airbase was a weapons system. And that wasn't accepted very well, certainly not as a statement of fact, and somebody said, or the response was, why would it be a weapons system? So we have to think about that. A weapon is something that gives you an advantage in a contest. That's all it is. It gives you an advantage in a contest. A weapons system is all of the things you need to operate that weapon. All right? So is an airbase a weapon system? Is an airbase something that gives you an advantage in a contest? Now, it's not a closed case. Consider it other weapon systems. F-35. We're pretty happy that for now, while we've got a technological edge, is going to give us an advantage in a contest. Right. Similarly, my button's working. The LHDs, I won't make any jokes about LHDs, they're supposed to give us an advantage in the contest as well. But what about these? Sugar, Curtin and Learmonth. Do we see those in the same sort of way as something that's critical to providing some advantage in a contest? Well, the jury might still be out. It might help if we look at it from somebody else's perspective. So do we think that the J-20 is going to give the Chinese armed forces an advantage in future conflicts? Probably, but we're matching it. Do we think their aircraft carrier is going to give them an advantage in future conflicts? Well, we're concerned about it, but nobody's making a real big fuss. The second one coming along because other countries have aircraft carriers too. But these things, everybody's been focusing on these things. We've already lost strategic influence in the South China Sea. China have already won by putting air bases there. So have those air bases provided China with an advantage in a contest? Absolutely. So are air bases a weapon system? I think so. So that's how we see air bases. That's how we need to see air bases. We need to build them and we need to operate them as a weapon system And that means we need to be able to coordinate the provision of services and effects to make sure that DG Air, DG ACOPS, or whoever the designated air component commander is at the time, that we use those resources to provide the maximum advantage for that commander in the generation of air power and the conduct of the air campaign. Can anybody tell me what this ship is? And where did it go? Well, it was salvaged, wasn't it? Oh no, it sunk eventually, I think. So that's the Atlantic conveyor. The Atlantic conveyor was used by the British to project force to the Falklands, for the Falklands War. So they stack a bunch of containers up the side. There's some great photos of it, stacked full of Harriers in plastic wrapping. A bunch of helicopters on board there with a Harrier on approach. So can you take a commercial product and adapt it for warfare? Well, that's what we do in CSG most of the time. If you want to go and do drought relief in PNG or flood relief, we'll go and we'll lob into Jackson's International Airport and we'll rely on the airport infrastructure and the airport security and all these other things, and we'll just operate in an area. So that's what we're doing. And it is appropriate to do that as long as the threat systems that are against you can be countered. So that's what happened to the Atlantic conveyor. It took 2 exocets, caught fire, they lost all the helicopters, and it didn't work out very well. Having said that, one of their warships was hit the same day, the Sheffield, I think. So the radar signature was so big on the Atlantic conveyor, particularly with those containers on it, that the only way, standard decoys weren't going to work against exocet chaff. So their technique was to take a Sea King and hover it near the stern, and as the exocet came, they would open up a gap, and they would think the exocet would see it as one object and fly for the centre of mass and go through the gap in the middle. Well, it didn't work, clearly. But anyway, that was the concept. There's 2 anecdotes I want to talk about quickly here that relate to this for air bases. So at Amberley, there was a tanker had come in to collect some waste, something or other, I think waste fuel, out of an ullage pit. And it had trouble getting access, so it was backing up and it backed over one of those plastic grates in the ground where irrigation fittings are. And the bogey on the back of the tanker fell through and it squashed the water pipe that the irrigation system was tapped into. That's no big deal, right? That water pipe fed the safety shower at the fuel farm. And under work health and safety, you can't operate a fuel farm if you don't have a safety shower. So the fuel farm automatically shut down. And we couldn't get the fuel farm going again until water pressure was restored. If you're an airbase commander, if you're an air commander or a TUC commander, and you're on a base that's just taken a salvo of cruise missiles, the bad dudes are coming over the horizon and you want to get your next wave off, and the airbase commander says, sorry, can't refuel until I get the safety shower going again, you'd be saying, you know, we do have exemptions against the Work Health and Safety Act for defence purposes. All right, so there's probably a myriad of similar things out there in our air bases that we don't know about because they're not being designed as a weapon system that are going to catch us out if we ever get put in a tight spot. The other scenario, which is a concern, is let's say we took a commercial ship and put a military crew on it. Would the military crew know how to operate the ship? So if we go to Safe Base Delta in Darwin next week for any reason, what's going to happen with CIOG? What happens to all the CIOG people on the base? They walk away, right? All the non-essential people have to leave, civilians, APS. All the essential people are given the opportunity to leave, the essential civilians. CIOG will walk away. Any contracted health support will walk away. Contracted security will walk away. All of those other services that are there that are being provided by APS and contracted workforce will walk away. So Air Force then have to backfill that. Okay, fine, we'll take a bunch of Air Force people from the southern bases and we'll move them up to Darwin. So one CCS are going to walk in to the server rooms in Darwin and going to go, what is this? So the plan is apparently that we'll just ring DNOC at Harmon and say, I've got this thing here and I don't know what it is, can you show me how to work it? So again, we've got a problem for the permanent bases up north. If they're not operated as a weapon system, will we even know how to operate them if we get to that point? So it's just something to think about. That can be managed, right? But we probably need some familiarisation training on that stuff. All right, so built for purpose, trained operator. So what I want to talk about now is the development of various weapon systems over the generations. Now, with the 5th generation Air Force, we're talking about generations of combat aircraft, and then we're applying that to all other aircraft in the Air Force. So you had your 2nd generation fighters around the 1950s, the F-5A. We went into some advanced avionics, multi-mode type aircraft with Gen 3, and I think Gen 3 was the 1960s to 1970s, so the Mirage there. Then the F-18 comes along in about 1970. The Gen 4 aircraft, and what you can see in the cockpit of that Gen 4 aircraft is you're starting now to go to multifunction displays. So you're getting fused data or federated data from a whole bunch of different avionics systems coming in, and you can choose how you want that data displayed. So it improves the situational awareness of the pilot. They've got access to more information. And then the 5th generation fighter is a complete step change up. So we've seen all of that development in that type of weapon system since the 1950s. Now, it's not only combat aircraft that have been doing this. And this is really goes to what I think we need to do on air bases. So in 1950, the US ran a war game. So they had been concerned in World War II that when the kamikazes were attacking, that they were almost getting overwhelmed. But by putting enough people in the ops rooms, they were managed to process the threats and everything and send the fighters out against them, and they managed to just get by. But then they did some modelling against the Soviet threat in 1950 with the jet aircraft able to close a lot more quickly with the target areas. And they found out that no matter how many people they put in the ops rooms, if there was humans in the loop, they would get overwhelmed. They could not process information fast enough to take all the sensor data in and respond to the threats. So they built their first naval tactical data system, and it weighed 105 tonnes, and they could only fit it on aircraft carriers. Right, but they did that, and the first one went to sea in the USS Enterprise in 1964. And since then they've developed the Aegis system, the Advanced Combat Direction System, and the Ship Self-Defence System Mark I and Mark II. Our own naval platforms, since about the mid-1990s with the Anzac frigate, have had the Saab, it's called the 9LV CMS Combat Management System. And now we're operating the Mark IV in the LHD, and the future frigate will have an Aegis combat system with the Saab integrator. So again, they've been developing that over time. So we've had 60 plus years of development of combat management systems to get the humans out of the loop so we can process all the data to respond effectively in a contest. Right, so what about air bases? Well, this is, I don't know, this is not an air base, right, but it's one of those op centres in England back in the 1940s. That's pretty cool. I really like this picture. Right. And then we go to Darwin for pitch black not long ago. Now, obviously, we have a feminised workforce, which is good to see. They have some flash new uniforms, and they have a computer. But if you look at it closely, what's the same in both of those pictures? There's somebody on a telephone with a pen. If you go to an airbase now, we are still manually processing information with a human in the loop at every stage of every process. We don't have any automated information systems to pass that data around. So we've still got humans in the loop. So we're trying to coordinate 200 products and services with a human in the loop at every stage of every process. That's got to be intensive. And if you want to have a look in the Middle East, pretty much the same. So it doesn't change on ops. It's in the Middle East. Now compare that with the ops room in an Anzac frigate. So a lot of automated information processing going on in there. Right, so Chief of Air Force said that by 2027, I think was the date, we will be a fully 5th generation force. And there's some characteristics of the 5th generation Air Force as outlined in the Air Force strategy. Fully networked, exploiting the effects of readily available, integrated and shared battlespace picture. Right, so this is my proposition, that if we're going to be a fully 5th generation force, then we have to have 5th generation air bases. Otherwise, the 5th generation airbase, or the 2nd generation airbase we've currently got, is simply that critical vulnerability that the enemy identifies when they do their JMAP, when they come and target you. It becomes a soft underbelly. Would we target air bases if we're taking on an enemy in a contest? Go and do a tour of Q8 or anywhere like that at the start of Desert Storm, and it's pretty obvious that we would. So I propose that a 5th generation airbase is a fully networked system of systems that exploits the advantage of a readily available, integrated and shared battlespace picture to coordinate our force protection and force generation and sustainment roles. And that then forms part of the fully fifth generation Air Force. Now we have some airbase specific challenges. In the national support base, we have to interface with service provider groups, right? So they're not going to be on our secret combat system. Okay, so they use all different systems there. Oh, I've got to go back. When we go away, let's say we go to Port Moresby, we're going to be interfacing with Jackson's Airport. We're going to be interfacing in Malaysia with the Royal Malaysian Air Force at Butterworth. We might be, interfacing with both militaries and civil authorities and contractors. So again, they won't be sitting inside our secret combat system. And we also need to interface with commercial service providers. So a couple of years ago now, we encouraged all the air bases to get on DSN. It was about time they got on DSN, started using the Air and Space Operations Command and Control System applications to inform them. And we got told that that was ridiculous because most of their job was to book accommodation. This is one particular base. Most of their job was to book accommodation with DHA, and DHA aren't on DSN. So it's going to be problematic. So I had to think about that and took it on board, and that, it was a bit, why would that stop you using a secret system? But then we realised that if you actually, lay that out across the airbase, it's a massive problem. Because we have so many products and services that are lying in a FUO domain or an unclassed domain because they are lying outside what we control in the military. So we have to come up with a combat management system that can deal with the secret side and deal with the unclassed side or the FUO side. So we decided that we need to build an airbase command network. Now we didn't just do this straight up. We came up with a concept. And a company called Darrenmont Technologies in Adelaide, or based in Melbourne and Adelaide, they did Vigilair. They've done some stuff with Navy electronic warfare. We got them on board as our prime system integrator. They went around the world, basically. They wouldn't take me with them, but they went around the world and they looked to see whether other countries or other companies had anything on offer that would do this. And the answer is no. It's unique. It hasn't been cracked. So I'll explain what we're going to do. We're going to have a bus controller if you're an avionics person or a network controller. And we're going to have a whole bunch of systems and applications hanging off that bus. But they're all provided by different vendors and they all speak different proprietary languages. So we're using DSTG's Lasagna middleware and we're putting all those systems through APIs and translating them all to a core network language. Also, we're not just going to have cable and fibre running around the place. We're going to have alternate bearers. Now, we know that we use VHF and UHF radios, but we think that GSM is fantastic for airbase type communications. So we're going to look at investing in GSM bearers. And when we go to a coalition environment, a coalition airbase, and they're operating on secret systems and where the accreditation will allow, we'll make provision to bring their systems into the ABCOM net as well. But here's the catch. We need the other side, where most of the products and services will live. Also, if I want to put a sensor on a bulk fuel tank at an airbase, I don't want to put a secret sensor on there and then have to secure it. But if it's just some data about a resistance amount that's coming out of a sensor because there's a certain level of fluid in the tank, that information of itself probably doesn't rate a secret classification. It's only when I bring all of that data in the system and make capability calculations on it that it becomes secret. So a lot of the sensors and a lot of the systems will be on the FUO side. So we're going to have a red side and a black side for our airbase command network. And we're going to connect the black side to the red side so that all of that sensor data and everything can come through into the secret system. So we look at our building management systems, our SCADA systems. We're going to be able to look at how much fuel we got in the barrels of our JP157 tankers. We're going to be able to see a whole bunch of stuff around the airbase. And then what we're going to do, and this is where 462 Squadron and ASD and everybody gets really, really jumpy, is we're going to pass information from the secret system back into the FUO domain. So I've drawn a resistor, not a diode, because they're going to be core data sets and we're going to scrub them and we're going to let them go back to the other side. Now, I'll give you a practical example. Sec4 are going to be running around on BMS and they're going to be chasing bad dudes inside the perimeter of the airbase. But they need to coordinate with the contracted security guards who are running around on the perimeter who've got a unclassed or FUO device like SARB Safe. We're going to make it so that Sec4 can sit on their secret device and send texts and pictures and battle space geometries through to the contracted security guards, and they can send stuff the other way as well. That is the big challenge. That's the challenge for ABCOM, to get it accredited to be able to do that. So what happens by the end of this is that any system, for the data sets that are allowed to go through the network, any application on either side of the system can pass data to the other side. So if we have an automatic weather station recording wind data on the FUO side, a SecForce sniper sitting on BMS will be able to read that data set through on the secret side and apply those wind corrections to the shot. Collect the data once, share it with everybody. That's the concept. Also, we're going to be able to take this system and lob into Butterworth or lob into Jackson's Port Moresby or lob into another airbase somewhere else and say, what security system do you use on your airfield? Right, we're going to write an API for that, or we've already got an API for that because we've been exercising with you, and we're now going to take all of your civil security guard tracks from Jackson's Airport into our system so we can see where they are and coordinate with them. So it becomes very useful in the deployed coalition environment where we're not using our own systems, we're using other people's systems. Then we're going to try and connect it to DSN once we've got the big nod of approval from ASD, and we're going to look at what we need on the other side into the World Wide Web. Does anybody want to say it's impossible? Right. Now, once we've got that core backbone, so you don't put a digital avionics bus in an aircraft and then just have that itself. The whole idea of putting these things into a combat management system in the ship is so that you can have advanced sensors and weapon systems operating from the ship, utilising all that extra information you've got. So once we get the core digital system on the airbase, it's then a matter of going back and developing all of those other 10 functional areas to bring them up to 5th generation as well. So an integrated airbase surveillance system, an integrated airbase protection system, etc, etc, etc. I had a phone call about lasers last week. I'm pretty excited. Only 1 kilowatt, but if you have enough of them, it's good apparently. Now, can the people at the back even see that on the screen? When we do the demonstration, we're doing a Jericho Dawn demo on 10th of July. We can't prove that this network's going to work unless we hang stuff off it that's going to produce data and use data so we can show that it's safe and the data flows, etc. So really what we're focusing on in the demo is the integrated airbase surveillance system. If you want to know how an airbase integrated surveillance system should work, just look at what we do in air surveillance. Right, at the moment, the way we do surveillance is we send patrols out to beat the bushes, to find the bad dudes, and then stab them with a bayonet or something like that, or arrest them and escort them off the base. We do have some focal surveillance systems like XTAS, and we do have some CCTV cameras in SAR 1 on the BSIP bases, but they're not integrated. So we're going to come up with an integrated airbase surveillance system that looks like an air surveillance system. So in the air surveillance system, you do your wide area surveillance. You've got your JAWN and you've got your primary surveillance radars. On an airbase, we're going to use passive infrared, passive radar, we'll use ground surveillance radar, and where we've got dead space, because where the passive infrared cameras can't see, where we'll use the Patrol Persistent Surveillance System, PPSS, and we'll put that in there. They're unattended ground sensors essentially, and they will feed in the system as well. So behind that building where you can't see, we've got a detection, so there's probably a track in there somewhere. So that's what the wide area persistent surveillance system will do. Now, the system we're using in the demo is by HGH, a company called HGH. It's a Spinel infrared sensor system, a Spinel C. At the top end, they can detect a human out to 8 Ks and a vehicle out to about 14 Ks, and they're a spinning camera. The one we're getting for the demo is not that model, but it's still about 3 and 8 Ks, I think, respectively. So it detects everything in that range. So that'll be pretty cool. And you can look that stuff up on YouTube if you want. There's some good demos there. So when we do this sweep with the passive systems and we get a track, what do we then do with it? So we're then going to use autonomous software. And a company called AOS, you might have heard of the Intelligent Watchdog. They've been doing a bit of work with Defence across the 3 services with their Intelligent Watchdog. They've got unattended ground vehicles, unattended air vehicles. Not interested in those just yet, too early for us. But what they've got at the top end is this software, this intelligent software. So we will feed, the first thing we'll do, for example, sorry, I should go back one, is we've got a system called SAMPRAS, Surface Air Missile Position Ranking, Position Reporting and Scoring, that was designed to tell us where terrorists could attack jet airliners at civil airports from. So what it does is you put a bunch of data in it, weapon data, weather data, terrain data, and it tells you where the bad dudes have to be to shoot at your aircraft or shoot at your airfield. So that's what I guess you would generally have a bunch of people in a battle lab, if you're in the army, working out where your next day's surveillance was going to go to give you the coverage of your NAIs. So we've got this electronic system that'll do it for us. We're going to automatically feed that into the wide area persistent surveillance system, which will automatically do its surveillance. When it detects a track, it goes into the intelligent watchdog software. What the intelligent watchdog software goes is, do we already have this track as a correlated blue force or green force track? So it'll go and check with the correlator. Correlator's another story, we'll get to that. If it doesn't, it's then going to automatically or autonomously task all of our focal surveillance systems to try and resolve that track. So for now, it'll steer XTAS cameras, it'll use SARB one view cameras, it'll use whatever it can, and the NEC NeoFace facial recognition software to try and say, I know that person, they're all right, they're a blue force or they're a green force. If it can do that, we won't even know. It'll just come up as a blue force or a green force, get a confidence or a level of confidence on the track, and away it'll go. The system will only bring the human into the loop if it does all this work with the focal surveillance systems and still can't resolve it. And so I've done everything I can, done this, done this, done this, done this. Security, you now need to sort this out. So that's how we look to process a lot more information on a lot more tracks a lot quicker and only bring the human into the loop when it's required. So that should represent quite significant workforce savings. The other thing, though, is when you're doing wide area surveillance, you've got a primary surveillance radar or a JAWN or something like that. If you don't have blue force trackers, if you don't have IFF, if you don't have ADSB, able to correlate those primary paints against a known track, then what are you going to do? You have to send somebody out there to look. So the other thing we have to invest in heavily is a lot of blue force tracking devices across the airbase. So we've already got a bunch, and we've engaged a company called MT Data. They're doing 97 of our vehicles for the demo. They're doing power carts. They're doing the Panther fire trucks. They're putting 4-channel 360-degree video recording on those. It'll stream back to us at 4G. We're doing ACLs, forklifts, a whole bunch of stuff. So we'll see where that stuff is. We'll see its usage data. We'll see if they've been speeding on the tarmac. We'll know whether the battery's flat, whether it needs refuelling, and all that information will come in, but it'll assist us primarily for that surveillance picture, but it'll give us so much more. So all the things we're doing. So just quickly moving on. So all this grey stuff here, in fact, I'll show you back up on this screen. So all of these white here, they're all processes carried out by the intelligent watchdog software that require no human in the loop. So a whole bunch of the surveillance, which currently happens primarily by using these sort of sensors on people that are patrolling, will become automated. So we've brought a whole bunch of organisations in to help us develop this for the demonstration. So that is what our prototype looks like now, with all of those companies involved. So 12 companies all providing systems into this network, and the challenge is we're going to interface all of those systems and make them all talk to each other through AbcomNet. What it also means is it proves that when we come across an innovative technology, we are going to be able to integrate it in the airbase very quickly, and that's part of the Jericho objective. So we're off doing something overseas, some new threat comes up, some boffin in some company somewhere in Australia says, I've got this great gadget that can fix that, and we go, righto, write us an API, translate it into this language, plug it into the system, away we go. And it becomes part of the integrated system. Right. So this is, we've got a shed. SFS gave us a shed, and we've spent a fair bit of money on our shed. And this is the desks. It looks better in the other direction. So we've put all these big screens up. The problem we've got is when we start this project, we've got 16, 20 different applications. I think we've got 23 different video inputs to that wall, and they're now asking us if we can give them some more. Because we've got all these applications that don't talk to each other, and until we actually do the coding to make them cross-communicate, we've got to display them all individually. But as we develop and mature this, hopefully we only need 3 or 4 screens, so the rest can go back to my lounge room and wherever else. So that's what we're setting up. So next week they're rolling DRN and DSN into the building, so every workstation's basically got 4 computers, and we're looking for a demo. That should be functioning by the 26th of June and have a demo running for the VIP day on the 10th of July. And then we'll wait for the next tranche of money to try and go in and do some more of the integration work. We're also going, one thing we're missing, I mentioned before, is a correlator. Those who operate in the air surveillance space know that you use Raytheon Solipsys as an air track correlator. We're using it, but it's not really good for the ground environment. Northrop Grumman have a product called SDK. They are telling us can do the job, but we're going to go and have a look at that and see if it'll provide the requirement for us. The reason the uniforms dangling over the seat there is because people have already recognised they won't be required in the future and they've just given up and gone home. All right, the last thing I want to move on to is some workforce concepts. So the current state in CSG is we've got 3,200 permanent people, about 1,800 reserves across 53 trade groups, sir. And they're sort of bundled into those 10 functional areas for management. They're generally working within those areas. There's not a great deal of, shall we say, professional development training within CSG to tell people how to fight airbases. We do have some courses in there. We've just put an basic airbase operations course on campus for everybody to go through. We do have some executive courses, but not a lot of professional training. And then what will happen with most people, if you're a logistician or you're a PCO or something like that, it can be I guess a death wish on your career if you spend too long in CSG. So we're trying to take people out of CSG and move them through other areas. So the result is you don't, by the time I got to flight commander in an airlift aircraft, I had a lot of time on the aircraft. 6 years plus ground jobs, a lot of flying. I'd lived it and breathed it for my whole career, basically. So that's not the case in CSG. People tend to parachute in and parachute out, and they tend to parachute into fairly stovepipe functional areas and not perhaps understand how the rest of the group or the rest of the functions of the airbase all work together to produce these integrated effects. And we don't have any airbase warfare specialists. So we probably need to look at improving our role-specific training, and it's on the cards. We're developing a fourth generation program to try and do that. One of the challenges we have is because our people day-to-day are providing raise, train, sustain support across the national support base for all the flying FEGs. Taking them out of that environment to send them on expeditionary exercises creates hurt. So it's very difficult when you've got a fairly tight force structure to get people away for that specific fourth generation training. The Navy, in their ops rooms and across their systems, they employ combat system operators. Right, so they start off as a generic combat system operator operating all the sensors, and then they specialise in subsurface warfare, surface warfare, air warfare. Right, so that's a specialist stream. We've identified a need to get some ASOPs into the FEG through force structure review to put them onto some of the surveillance systems we've got. Because people that like to walk around with dogs and guns perhaps aren't as skilled, proficient as operating electronic surveillance systems as perhaps some people in the ASOP world would be. And there's no doubt that we could increase their training to get those skills up, but do you really want to be doing that? Do you really want to be distracting from their other task? So the South African Air Force model is they use air surveillance operators for ground surveillance tasks on air bases as well. The other thing we've mooted is, do we look at something called an operations specialist as a feeder mustering for OPSO, similar to a combat system operator, a person skilled in operating C4I systems, and utilise them on the airbase through a streaming process. Navy in the officer ranks have marine warfare officers. Again, they're general and then they're specialised. Is there a place for an airbase warfare officer, particularly once you get into those critical positions in coordinating the outputs of the airbase, particularly in the high end? So we're actually we intend to field candidates on AWIC 2023 and graduate airbase tactics instructors. Those people that will go on that course will be flying officers now. So we've actually started identifying some people that might be those first air warfare instructors. How do we get people from here to there? And then how do we employ them effectively after they graduate from that course and go back into the air bases? So they are all great things for discussion, and they're all unknowns at this stage. Then we have to look at, do we stream people within the FEG? So in the flying FEGs, people in certain specialisations get streamed, pilots get streamed, ACOs get streamed. Are we going to need to stream people in CSG to get that investment into the system so they can become sufficiently technically proficient and have the professional mastery to fight an airbase? Or can we manage it another way? So what next? Okay, so we've got a Jericho Dawn on the 10th of July. We're hoping you'll be there, sir. We are still trying to get Air Force Minor 1070 approved, which will give us an assured stream of funding. And we're working with the program steering group to look to major investment in an airbase command and control capability system through the integrated investment program. So we estimate that would probably be somewhere in the order of 200 to 250 million to roll out across all the airbases and the expeditionary units. Now, that only buys the core. So that only buys your ship's combat management system. It only buys your aircraft digital avionics bus. It doesn't buy all of the upgrades for all of the sensors and weapon systems that are now possible because you've got them enabled through this digital core. So I think we're starting, if you look at what Navy have done, you could say, and if you're looking at the concept of being a fully fifth generation Air Force by 2027, we're essentially starting on a 70-year journey, but we've started 60 years too late, if you take it by the Navy timeline. Fortunately though, we can now just copy off them for some things. So in summary, I believe air bases are weapon systems. Fifth generation air bases are an essential element of a fully fifth generation force, or they just become a weak link. Our air bases require a modern digital combat information system. That's what we're trying to build through ABCOMnet. And substantial investment across all airbase functional systems is required to bring them up to a fifth generation standard. The future airbase workforce will need to be role specialised and technically focused. So it's a major change, both in technologies and in culture. That's it. Happy to take questions. I only talked for 45 minutes.
I'll kick it off with an icebreaker, mate. That was a great presentation. Thanks very much. And a lot of it certainly near and dear to my heart. Is that working? As a bloke that was responsible for fighting an airbase in Afghanistan, of whiteboards, Roshan mobile phones, and unclass email systems, this resonated very clearly with me, both on an NSB basis and an expeditionary sense. But by the time it coalesces up to a C2 node, as observed in Afghanistan, the coalition setting is going to be important. Can we integrate coalition workforce into the C2 systems that we're going to need to operate in that hub, given the security considerations there?
So I guess the experience to date, if you look at all the air bases around the world, they tend to be controlled along national lines. Now, they're not operated along national lines, but they're controlled along national lines. You'll generally have a national commander. It'll be the Brits are running this base or the US are running this base. And then sitting under that, you'll have a series of contributions from a whole bunch of nations, potentially. So what we're building here is a system where we can go to an airbase, or we go to a planning activity that's talking about establishing an airbase, and we can say to the Brits, or we can say to the Kiwis, say to the US, or we can say to the regional partners, we're bringing this system in. What systems do you have that we can look at now to integrate? And so, absolutely, what it means is that when we are an Australian entity operating on a US base, or where there's a New Zealand or Singaporean entity operating on an Australian base, then they then become an integrated part of the system. We can see all their tracks, we can see their resources, we can task them, and we can coordinate activities between nations, whereas at the moment, that's simply not possible except manual human-in-the-loop processes and deconfliction. So that's the intent.
Go, Howie. What's your model for the bare bases? I'm thinking three COAs. One is you have a complete system set up similar to the way that you've got your main bases set up, or two, you've got a bit of a hybrid system where you've got some infrastructure set up, or do you do a bring it all just like you would in deployment?
Yeah, so I guess that's an important consideration. It needs a lot of examination. At the moment, we could theoretically go to a bare base and we could take a completely deployed comm system. But that then sort of takes away from the advantage of having a bare base. So you might want to put a lot more infrastructure in there. I'm not sure what the answer is at this point. What is very exciting with this project, though, I believe, is, for example, we went to meet with Air 7000 Phase 1B, the Triton guys, and they're saying the Triton might be over the Indian Ocean, it might have a lost link, or it might have an engine problem, and it's going to automatically recover to wherever it was programmed to go. It might be Curtin. And this big grey bird will turn up, and it's all right, there'll be a CD in the nose wheel well. You can get it out and put it in your computer and find out what to do with it. And I said, well, if we digitise the air bases and the core of the bare bases, then we can just provide you with a link. And when that vehicle gets back within line of sight, of Learmonth or Curtin, you'll be able to pick up control again through the terrestrial links because we can trunk the whole system. Another thing that's going into our building in Amberley for now is the Indra virtual tower, which we're working with 44 wings. So we can do air traffic, because it's pretty silly when you go in a war zone to stand up on the highest tower in the place with a whole bunch of glass windows, if you ask me. So why not just put the camera up there and sit in a bunker, which makes a lot more sense. So we're putting the Indra virtual tower in with the Airbase command post. It's a similar technology to the spinal cameras. It's an array of cameras. So once we've got this set up, we can control a bare base. We can activate a bare base. We have to send people there to do the jobs until we automate them all. But we can operate a bare base, or we can operate multiple bases from one location. So we can do air traffic control, and we can control ops and coordinate services at Williamson, or at Sherga, or at Curtin from Amberley. So in terms of being able to employ aircraft in an agile sense, and say I now want 6 fighters that were based at Tyndall to operate from Curtin for 3 days, we will still have to move some stuff out there, but all of the command and control structures to make it go live, we can just flick a switch and away we go until the enemy has a vote. So I think that's the important thing. We have to look at what pragmatically we can put into those bare bases to enable that sort of activity to occur without having to deploy it all. Does that answer your question?
Just a question about HMASAlbatross and Army Aviation Centre Oki. Is Army on board with this? Is Navy on board with this? It's a great idea, but whether the other two services are willing to put money in to upgrade their own bases?
So we haven't specifically worked with Army or Navy, but being mindful that when we go on operations, obviously the Army generally go out in the field and they'll probably contact our APOD. So what we're very aware of, and adding to that, there's been a lot of talk about BMS, and we need to operate BMS because the Army will be there. So the Army will only be in the same battle space as us generally for an APOD type activity or maybe a HADAR activity. So one of the systems within our network is BMS. And what that means is that if an Army unit are in the area and we have a BMS node hanging off ABCOMNet, their BMS will talk into our BMS, which will then talk into ABCOMNet, and we're still coordinating services all the way across the airbase. So again, any systems they are using, we can identify the requirement to integrate those. So not specifically about the other services bases, which are more of garrisons than area bases, but certainly we recognise a requirement to be able to coordinate with their forces. So there's one over here.
So just wondering if you've done any modelling to work out how many people you'd be able to do without in the future.
It's funny, when the J-model Herc was coming into service and the engineers came over from Lockheed, they showed us the cockpit mock-up, and then they had the one that they wanted to put in, which was just a switch that said stop and go. You know, a technical zealot would tell you that we don't need any people, but yes, we do. I think we're always going to have somebody to push the button to shoot the laser once the appropriate rules of engagement have been modelled. I think where the big savings are in the surveillance space. So if you look at a traditional way of defending or securing an airbase, you might have observation towers or pickets every couple of 100 metres around the entire perimeter. And then you multiply that by 3 shifts if you're working 24/7, and you're bringing other people on the airbase that are doing other jobs out there to augment the security forces to do that. And you need hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of security forces. So if we can provide coverage with with an appropriate level of assurance that we're going to detect all incursions in that area, then you move your security forces into being a response force. You're still doing some patrolling. And again, if you detect a threat 8 k's that way, because somebody's shooting a mortar or a rocket at you, why send a PMV full of troops out there to shoot them with a rifle if you can just hit them with a standoff weapon? So I think there's I won't say there's going to be personnel savings in the security space, because if you do the modelling, we're probably well short on security as well. What we're going to be able to do is bring us back into balance, more into balance of being able to do the job we need to do with the people we've got, by moving a lot of those functions onto automated systems. So that's really what it's about. It's about extending what we can do with the people we've got. I don't think we're going to see a wholesale, okay, you don't need to turn up to work on Monday. We haven't done any real modelling because we don't know what the system can do. But we're only going to produce that core command and control system initially, and then when you start to do analysis of what can we do in the health space? What can we do in the airfield engineering space? What can we do in the security space? Then you're going to be able to come up with those numbers, but not at this point. Only to say it'll make it better, I think. Cam.
So what will happen if we want to deploy this system into a host nation where they don't want to have a bunch of these sensors and things put up in that environment? Is there going to be a backup system? We're going to go back to chalkboards and telephones, or how will that work?
Yeah, so that's really important, and in fact it goes into your design. We have to recognise that when we go to somewhere like, I don't know, the Middle East, maybe the country we're there, they go, happy to have you here, but can you not tell everybody you're here? And we could be going somewhere in Asia and the country's going, all right, we like you here, don't really want everybody to see that you're here. And we go, well, we'll need to patrol out in the streets because there's an enemy special forces threat to our airbase. They go, you're not patrolling in the streets, you're just going to stay inside the airbase. So we need a lot of passive technology, so passive radar, passive infrared, and other passive detection systems. We can gain situational awareness of what's going on in the approaches without having to put people out there. So a lot of passive systems. So we don't see that that would be overtly invasive on them because we have to go in, what does the SOFA say we can do? The other thing is, in terms of response systems, the rules of engagement in that host nation might be very restrictive. And so you get to this situation where people can be over there 600 metres outside the airbase with clearly the intent to do some bad things, and there's not much you can do about it until they actually take some sort of offensive action, and then you respond in self-defence. So not only do you need to be able to detect what's going on and gain situational awareness without being invasive, but you need to be able to respond very quickly and effectively. So when that third, before that third mortar round hits the ground, you've got your counter battery fire or whatever going out, going, hey, I know we've got rules, but I was operating in self-defence. Now, in terms of the other aspects of it, which is the networking of the system, I guess the advantage is that we're not going to go into somebody else's airfield and say, all right, we're going to roll out this computer system and you're going to use it. No, we're going to go into the airfield and we're going to go, hey, what are you guys using to coordinate your refuelling operations? They go, we're using this. We go, oh, we know how that works. Do you mind if we plug it into our system? Right, and then there's a bonus for both sides because they know where we are and what we're doing, and we know where they are and what they're doing. But you're going to need, particularly on an airbase that's dual use, where you've got a civilian airport, where you've got coalition countries, and where you're operating your own military forces. There are so many tracks, there are so many green force tracks, that are not friendly, they're not hostile, but you don't know when they might turn hostile. That you have to be able to maintain awareness of that, probably more so than anywhere else, unless you're an aircraft carrier sailing down the Straits of Malacca. But I believe it'll be less invasive and more likely to achieve the information or situational awareness we need by being able to work with other countries.
So are you also looking at having UAVs as small UAVs as sensors to input to the system?
Not lethal ones just yet. No. So I talked about Intelligent Watchdog. So Dr. Andrew Lucas, he wants his autonomous drones out there. So it's all right to go and operate drones in a field training area for Army, or even sometimes around fleet units or a fleet base, right? It's not really complex battle space. So if I was to use an analogy for an airfield, it's sort of like operating in an amphibious operations area for Navy and Army. It's a very complex battle space. So what we've said is we love what drones could do for us, but we can't allow drones, we can't be very effective with drones in an airbase until they can be safe. So the concept here is when we've got this digitised core, we will have a digital, so in the air world you have an airspace control plan, you have airspace control measures. We have a digital equivalent of that for the airbase. So the UAV will have a data link back to the core command centre, and it will maintain a live or a periodic update of that digital battle space picture. So if there's other tracks moving in it, if there's control measures being put in place, exclusion zones being put in place, it knows what's happening, and it can, just like your sat-nav in your car, get you home without going through the speed cameras or through the tolls. So we know the technology can do that. So that's the first part of it. Then if it loses that data link, the concept could be, because we've got some fairly tight airworthiness regulations we're going to have to meet here. So the concept, if it loses that data link for more than a predefined time, it's got an ADS-B transceiver on board. It's been receiving ADS-B so it can avoid aircraft where the pilot goes rogue and tries to run into it. But once it's not receiving that data link and the UAV is distressed, then it will transmit on ADS-B, give the aircraft a chance to get out of the way of the UAV, and then follow automatic recovery profiles to get back on the ground and out of the way. So to put all that in a UAV and have a useful endurance and a useful payload moves your UAV category up beyond the micros. So a different set of regulations. So we see that there's a lot of work to be done to prove to ACPA that we can operate these things safely and effectively around air bases before we're going to start doing that. Particularly at the moment, it says 1 pilot, 1 UAV. I want to have 25 UAVs with no pilots, and I won't even know why it's flying because it was told to go flying by an intelligent watchdog. So that's where we'd like to get to. Now, it'll happen sometime in the future. We're only arguing about when. So that's what we're trying to do. But we also want to use the cameras on the UAVs not only to support facial recognition, but your IDs, so RFID technology. UHF RFID, now the bigger units can be scanned from 100 metres away. We think if we can get something, we can excite the field and then sense an RFID chip from 10 metres away. We can set up a flight path for a UAV where we can do concurrent facial recognition and scanning of your ID. So that'll give us a great certainty of identification. That's probably the utopia. But yeah, for both the air vehicles and the ground vehicles, we want to do that. We also want to use UAVs post-incident, so post-airfield crash or post-airfield attack, that will send up a fleet, not just one because it takes too long, but a fleet of UAVs with a photogrammetric payload. So the current standard, you can go out to a company and get it, is they fly at 400 feet, they'll give you a 3D image in 1 centimetre resolution. Right, so if we have an airfield attack, we've got craters, we've got bomblets, we've got exposed HV cables, we've got exposed sewers, we've got casualties. A fleet of these things can be sent up, they can operate in their own areas, they 4G stream the data back into GeoXPT, which we're in the process of procuring off the US, and you can be sitting in the planning area and your airfield engineers can plan how much spoil they have to get out of the craters, how much aggregate they need to mine and bring in to fill the craters, how many bomblets they've got to dispose of, what high voltage cables they need to patch, how we're going to get the casualties out of the area before they even leave the safety of the bunker. And you can imagine the utility of that if you're in a chemical contaminated environment. And also we can put chemical sensing payloads on these things as well. Yeah, so again, HADAR, and I've been speaking to AGO about this as well. So HADAR, we go on exercise to an airfield in the region, we put the drones up, we do a survey of it. Then there's a flood or earthquake or other event 6 months later, we pull that data back out of AGO, and then as soon as we get over there, we send the drones up again to get a comparison and work out where we need to go. So that also allows us not to set the hospital up in a swamp like we might have done before. Make sure that when we lay the airbase out as close to the services we get out of the GFIS intel and stuff as well. So absolutely, drones are part of the future. Got to make it safe for them to operate in the complex environment of an airbase.
Good brief, thanks sir. Just a question, are you developing algorithms for the systems analysis to optimise the base functions after in terms of battle damage repair, but also for the deployment of your protection and defensive measures?
So I'm just the ideas guy. Yeah, right. So SAMPRAS, what SAMPRAS does is you put your weather data, you put your terrain data, you put your weapons, enemy weapon systems, and you put your airbase laydown. It then works, and the flight paths, and your wind, cloud, visibility, and it then works out whereabouts in the area around the airbase you could be targeted from. And based on that, it will then take all the characteristics of all your surveillance and response systems and recommend where you should place them. Right now, at the moment, I would love to have a set of unattended ground sensors that could get up and walk to where you wanted them and then squat down until you wanted to move again. But at the moment, somebody would have to go out and place these sensors and tow the trailers around. But SAMPRAS will do that. GeoXPT, what that will do is when you're trying to lay out an airbase, so the US operate on what they call unit type codes. Every unit has a unit type code. It says they've got 18 tents, they've got 20 k's of piping. And they'll bring into GeoXPT the unit type code and it will lay out, it says this is a 12-foot tent, you need 8 feet between them, and every third one you need a power cable. So you can bring in the unit type code for a marine deployment into Amberley and lay them out on the base. What we will do once we have that is we'll work through AFIC and through a coalition silver flag to develop allied data sets, so that if we go on a US base or a Canadian base, or the English are going to the US, is that we'll be able to import each other's unit type code or allied data sets to work out how we're going to lay out those systems on the airbase. So there'll be a lot more autonomy in planning, I guess, or assistance in planning. So we should be able to launch, this is what we're trying to do with HoloLens. The concept is we've got to go into an APOD somewhere because something's happened, HADAR, or there's a NEO or something going on. We should be able to launch the team that are going in there in a C-17, take another team away into a planning room, sit there with GeoXPT, bring the data in from AGO, plan the layout of the airbase when they get there, beam that to them through Skyview 360, whatever it is they got in the C-17. They'll be able to then put on their HoloLens and they'll be able to walk through in 3D what that airbase is going to look like when they get there and walk out the back of the C-17. And where the cable pits are that they need to, make sure there's no explosives in there, where they're going to lay out their movement section and all that. They'll be able to rehearse it before they get on board. And just yesterday, I had a call back from the embassy in Washington that the US want to be collaborative with us in that process because they were thinking about doing it as well, and we happened to mention it to them. So hopefully we'll have a collaborative project to get that happening.
Thanks, Howie. Thanks for the presentation. Just a quick question. What resilience measures are you considering, particularly in post-night environments?
Yeah, Donna. In terms of developing the prototype, we're not allowing the prototype for specific resilience and robustness in the cyber domain for that because we're just trying to prove the concept, but we recognise it needs to be there. One of the concepts is like ERP, so obviously we're hand in glove with ERP, but with ERP, I think one of the criteria is that when you're deployed and you get disconnected, it has to continue to operate. So it caches data, operates off a deployed server, like GeeksJ does. So the ABCOM net will go to a deployed space. It works on its own servers. It will connect through Chris into the strategic domain. It will pass information between the airbase and the strategic domain when it can and replicate onto the other Chris servers. And when it can't, we'll just operate within our data set. So we do recognise that. We're saying that when we set this system up, we're not going to have it in one cabin. We need to have it distributed in multiple locations around the airbase. There'll be some sort of deployable unit you'll take. You'll say, put that over there and put sandbags around it, put that other bit there and that other bit there and have multiple redundancy. So the same principle you apply when you design multi-redundant aircraft mission systems and data buses would apply to the airbase command network. You had another one? No?
Thank you for your engagement with this topic. It sounds like we're going to get a lot of pathfinders out of here, at least. This sort of presentation is one of DGSP's priorities. He wants us to start talking about future capability, about what the fifth generation Air Force is going to look like, not just things with wings, but also all of the things that support the things with wings. So if you could join me in thanking our Wing Commander Howard for doing questions.